Hi everyone. In this chapter, you'll learn how to dig into what it means to read as well as write rhetorically. You will learn how to vary your reading practices according to your purpose for reading, how to summarize visual texts, and how to read with and against the grain of a text. The learning objectives for this chapter are to carefully read a text, analyze its parts and their functions, and summarize its ideas. You should also be able to write strong responses to text by interacting with them, either by agreeing with, questioning, or actively challenging them. Remember, you might have to work hard at reading in college, so be prepared. You'll encounter highly specialized language, new rhetorical contexts, and new genres. Prior to college, we often are not asked to or really forced to look more in-depth at what we're reading. It's typically something like, read Lord of the Flies and answer these questions that just show you can identify the main characters. In college, the expectation is that you dig deeper to expand your thinking. I have students who come into the course and right off the bat they say they want to improve their writing, but then they don't do the assigned reading and don't read beyond what's necessary for school. If you don't read, you can't improve your writing because you're not getting that exposure to other writers and writings that you need. If you don't do the reading for the course, you won't learn the concepts at the collegiate level. I could go to a middle school and the kids can tell me what a thesis is, but that doesn't mean they're ready to write one for English 1001. So this chart comes directly from the book. You'll probably have seen it before, but you'll definitely want to take a harder look at it and read through it. It really shows the ways you should be changing your thinking about reading. These are the strategies that should make their way into your reading processes. As I mentioned earlier, students think reading for classes is a one-and-done kind of thing. It's really not. You should have a distinct method for the kind of reading you're doing. You should have a process for skimming, where you're just looking to pick up key elements quickly, a process for reading for comprehension, and a process for reading for detailed analysis. If you don't, now is the time to start expanding on those processes, not just for this class, but for all of your classes. Also, as someone who spent significant time in the corporate world, if you're going into that kind of field, you'll be expected to read between the lines, make inferences, analyze, and pull things out of what you're given that aren't right there on the page almost immediately. So let's talk a little bit about reading a text, analyzing its parts and their functions, and summarizing its ideas. The book talks about reading with the grain, which is to listen well to the text, to read against the grain, which is to ask questions and challenge the text. The combination of reading with and against the grain helps you understand the text as well. And when you respond to a text by interacting with them, you can do this by agreeing with them or questioning them or actively challenging them. Students often struggle with the notion of reading against the grain. Reading against the grain is reading a text to examine the writer's angle of vision, not only of the writer, but also of the writer's group affiliations or society. On page 69, you can take another look at some strategies for rereading. It may not only be the writer of the text who assumes readers will be heterosexual or Christian. Such assumptions are commonplace in contemporary American society. The predominance of such assumptions does not make a writer any less responsible for his or her predispositions. In fact, when such assumptions are widespread, a reader's critique may need to be stronger. The key to strong rhetorical reading is the ability to read against the grain, even if you agree with what's being said, or even if you are the intended audience. Even if you identify with the intended audience, even if you agree with what they're saying, you should still be alert to ways that other readers might feel excluded. Defying marginalization is in the best interest of everyone, not just those who are excluded. For example, I'm a heterosexual married mother of two who reads a lot of parenting articles. Being a rhetorical reader, I find articles that speak only to me and my specific situation to be less credible than those that account for a wider audience, such as single moms, single dads, grandparents raising kids, non-heterosexual couples, siblings raising kids. It's not that I'm super liberal, although there is nothing wrong with that. It's because it speaks to the writer's inability to accurately visualize his or her audience. I look at the article as being not of high quality because the writer did not have the skill set to take into account the audience she was writing for, parents. And if, as a writer, you can't even identify who your audience consists of, then I would be hesitant to think you'd be able to adequately research and convey quality information. Additionally, I may not be able to use her information long term. What if I'm not married anymore? What if one day I find myself raising my grandchildren? Her article was only for straight married women, so now I'm excluded from that audience. Additionally, as a rhetorical reader and writer, I am asking questions and seeking understanding that could come from the writer conveying the issue from different perspectives. No matter how universal an issue is, each group and subset of that group will grapple with it differently, and everyone gains perspective and knowledge when an article includes all intended audience members. Of course, if the article is specifically for one distinct group, that's different, but here I'm referencing general parenting articles. So, challenge what you read, and for that matter, challenge what you watch. You probably do anyway and just don't realize it. In college writing, students feel that they don't have the authority to challenge a published article, but you do. Whether or not you're the author's intended audience, you're reading their work, and therefore, you have the right and authority to question, question, question. This is, for me, one of the most important concepts you can either learn or learn more about in this course. To help you get there, there are some additional questions you can use when you read. What questions does the text trigger for you? What places in the text are particularly thought-provoking? Why? What is excluded from the text that may bias its conclusions? What aspect of the text data, evidence, and arguments are not persuasive? Why not? What can you observe about the author's perspective or angle of vision that the author does not directly acknowledge? What is questionable about the writer's values, beliefs, and assumptions, both stated and unstated? What will you gain by accepting the writer's view? What will you lose? What assumptions does the writer make of the reader's values? Do you feel excluded from the intended audience of this text? If so, how? If not, who might and why? How do these exclusions limit the text? Another small mistake in reading that I've seen countless students make is skipping the author's information. For example, in textbooks, it might precede the article, or when you're doing research, not making sure that you haven't selected a highly biased author for your research papers. So it's always important to have some idea of where the author's coming from if you want them to be a credible source for you. So when you're writing strong responses to texts, you're interacting with them. You're either agreeing with them, you're questioning them, or you're actively challenging them. It's important to keep in mind that constructing a strong response is a process. First, summarize. Scan the text quickly to get a sense of it. Read it carefully. After that, noting what each paragraph does and says. Then identify the main sections of the text you're reading. Once you've summarized the reading, consider how to respond in light of your experiences, your values, your knowledge. The strong response can take several forms. It can be a rhetorical critique, an ideas critique, or even a reflection. No matter how you're responding, the last two slides should show you that you will want to incorporate those different reading strategies right away. The key to a strong response paper is the summary section, but then also the analysis of the elements. There has to be a balance between the two. In your book, you can locate Figure 5.2, a framework for a summary strong response essay. As you can see from this outline that they've put together for you, the summary only consists of about a paragraph. So really keep that in mind. It's not a regurgitation of everything that happened. You want to make sure you pay attention to the summary points. So let's do a quick review. What are the challenges of college reading? College reading is hard because it involves understanding technical and specialized vocabulary. It involves reading materials that were originally written for another rhetorical context, and it involves reading genres that you might not have seen before. What is involved in writing a summary? Summaries involve a very condensed presentation of a text's main points. The key is identifying the main ideas in the text and making sure that your summary is very clear on what the text actually said, as distinguished from your own thoughts about the text or its content. What does strong response mean? A strong response is a way of interacting with what you've read via asking questions, testing assumptions, and speaking back. Responses might critique the structure of a text, which is a rhetorical critique. It might critique the content, an ideas critique, or it might examine the relationship between the text and reader's experience, a reflection. Hope that helps. Thanks.